Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from your heart, sharing authentically with your students. Here on the podcast, you'll discover new and inspiring ways to share your cues and create your sequences. You'll uncover habits and frameworks all designed to empower you so that you can teach in a way that feels authentic and natural. For some episodes, I'll have a guest, and other episodes I'll share with you on my own, and in each one, you'll always get action steps and takeaways you can apply right away to your teaching. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok for daily videos. You'll see a link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link. Click it and unlock ways you can get the support you need to be the teacher of your dreams. You'll find links to the podcast, my free ebook, and other resources to help you be the best teacher you can be. You'll also find the link to my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, and you can see if you qualify to enroll. So with that, let's get on with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 363. I'm recording this on August 6th, 2025, and this is going live on August 11th. And again, if you're recently joining the show, I'm doing solo episodes after many months of doing guest episodes. If you're a longtime listener, welcome back. And today we're going to have a conversation about two different concepts in yoga teaching. And there are themes that came up throughout this week. I'm recording this on a Thursday, so on a Wednesday. So these are things that have popped into my head over the past couple of days. And I've actually done a couple of videos on them on my Instagram and TikTok. So in addition to listening to this episode, you can hop over to either of those and watch the videos and kind of hear some of this messaging, some of these thoughts, these lessons in the videos as well. The first thing that I want to talk with you about is a particular approach to teaching. And I love when I speak about something like this and teachers watch my videos and they respond, "Oh my God, you're talking directly to me," or "Oh my God, that's exactly me." And if you look at my TikTok video on this subject, you'll see there were two teachers that commented exactly that way. And I titled the video, and that's what we're going to talk about now, "Are you an overthinker?" So, how does that phrase hit you? Do you identify as an overthinker? Because if you do, you'll have a visceral reaction just hearing me ask you the question. And because I'm posing it as a question, your brain is going to answer the question either yes, no, or somewhat. So I'm asking you, are you an overthinker? And, not even in the context of teaching your classes, just as a person, because the way you are as a person is the way you are when you teach. It's not like when you walk in the room to teach your yoga class, you automatically become this enlightened being. You bring all of you into that experience. You bring all of the things that make you unique. You bring limiting beliefs. You bring things that allow you to tap into your authentic nature. You bring fear, you bring negative thoughts, so all of it comes with you. That's why I always say in the work that you do to learn, to grow, to become the kind of teacher you want to be, you will develop a better relationship with yourself because you'll be facing some of the fears you have. You'll be moving beyond some of the limiting beliefs you have in your life that get in the way of you teaching in in the most confident and empowered way possible. So I would love to know if you identify as an overthinker, and you can send me a DM on Instagram and let me know your answer to that question. Because I know from talking to a lot of teachers over the years, there's a lot of overthinking going on. And what spurned me talking about this is I was having conversations with a couple of yoga teachers via email over the past probably week or so. And both yoga teachers admitted they had problems, shared with me what their problems were, shared with me a little bit of the vision they had. And when it got down to were they going to enroll in one of my programs or not, said, well, I have XYZ going on right now as well. So I need to think if I can do your program and these other things at the same time. Now, believe me, I'm not judging or criticizing these individual teachers, and I am not saying you should not quote unquote think about whether or not, in this instance, you're going to enroll in my program. What I am saying though is oftentimes what the mind tells you is that you need to think about it. When in fact, you probably don't need to think about it. You probably know it's either yes or no. And I appreciate that sometimes teachers just don't want to say no to me. So they'll say something else. The whole conversation when it gets down to it in terms of enrolling in my program really is in large part a conversation about money. Does the person want to spend the money or not? And even though we're not outwardly talking about money a lot of the times, that's what they're thinking. And so people sometimes feel uncomfortable talking about money, and they feel uncomfortable talking, let's just be plain, talking to me about anything having to do with money. So they'll just sort of, or saying no. So they'll just sort of say something else to, I don't know, be nice or maybe avoid having to say, you know what, it's just not a good fit for me right now. And a lot of this comes from just in general, the discomfort around money, money beliefs, the discomfort with saying no. And I think that that's a cultural thing. And I definitely think it's something that women oftentimes have a hard time saying no. And no doesn't mean forever. No could just mean right now, no. But if you're an overthinker, what you'll say to yourself is, I need to think about it as a way to avoid making a decision. And making a decision looks like yes or no. Now, in the context of teaching yoga, let me share with you a little bit of how overthinking shows up. Overthinking shows up, and this is what I spoke about in the video, in large part as a yoga teacher who spends a lot of time prepping for class. They spend a lot of time writing out the sequence. They spend a lot of time practicing the sequence at home over and over again to go into the class and only be able to practice it with class because that's how they learned it. Even though in their head, they really wish they could walk around the room, but they didn't teach themselves the sequence that way. So to expect a different outcome is is inappropriate. You're not going to get a different outcome if you learn the sequence by practicing it a dozen of times at home. But that's what they do. And in regards to the overthinking part, what happens is they'll wake up in the morning and they're teaching that day, and a thought will pop in their head, oh my God, I need to tweak that one part of the sequence. And they'll pull out their sequence notes and they'll quote unquote tweak it a little bit. And that's the overthinking. The overthinking is what generates the thought in the head that I need to tweak this sequence. Now, remember, you've already practiced it dozens of times. You spent hours writing it out and thinking about what was going to be in it. And now at the last minute, you're tweaking it. And the tweaking, the need to tweak it comes from being the kind of person who overthinks. Overthinks. I'm thinking about my sequence. Is my sequence going to be well received? Is my sequence correct? Is the way that I put the poses in the sequence correct? And little sidebar, correct according to who, right? But these are oftentimes teachers who defer authority to whoever trained them or to anybody else that they believe has more experience than them. So they'll think to themselves, oh, I don't think that part is right, so I need to change it. So now they're interfering with their ability to teach it because they're changing it at the last minute. You see, overthinking in large part comes from a lack of confidence. Because if you were more confident, and I don't know if this is you, I'm just saying you because it's just you and I talking. So maybe this doesn't apply to you, but if you're listening and it does, overthinking comes from a lack of confidence. Because if you were confident or more confident in your abilities and your skill and your status, your expert status on any level, you wouldn't overthink things. You would do the thing, in this case, create the sequence, and you would teach it. And there wouldn't be a need to tweak it. There wouldn't be a waking up the morning of your class and a thought pops in your head to tweak the sequence. The thought not popping up in your head is the sign of confidence because you're overthinking behaviors would be replaced by a feeling of confidence. Confident yoga teachers don't overthink things. They do the thing. And, back to the other example of, and I'm not just talking about my program, it could be any program you're considering enrolling in. Confident teachers make a decision. I'm looking at what I'm lacking in terms of skills or knowledge or mindset work that I'd like to do. I've found a program that can help me, and I'm going to decide yes or no. I'm going to take the time to learn about the program, ask the person any questions I have, and then I'm going to make a decision. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to overthink about it. I don't need to put it on hold and, you know, kind of mull it over in my mind beyond a certain level of appropriate scrutiny, right? And due diligence. I can make a decision. And I also appreciate that decisions are not forever. A decision I make today doesn't mean that's the way it has to be forever. But, this whole idea of overthinking, and I gave you the example of the sequencing example. It can show up in lots of other ways as well. Thinking about your class numbers, thinking about how many people are in your classes, thinking about, am I popular enough? Thinking about, do my students like my class? Thinking about that whole sort of can of worms. Do my students like my classes? Are my students receiving me well? I get a lot of comments from teachers about the overthinking they do in regards to that whole topic of conversation, how my yoga students receive me. And this is really an area where overthinking can run rampant because you don't control how your students think. They control how they think. They decide what they think of you. They decide if they're going to come to your class. You can't make them do it. So the interesting thing is you can think and think about how to make your class numbers be higher, but at the end of the day, you can't really control that. Now, that doesn't mean you're a victim, and that doesn't mean that you can't control certain things that may have an impact on your class numbers. But there are things like, how do I show up in my class? How do I interact with my students? Do I know my sequence well? Am I walking around the room and watching them rather than practicing on my mat and sort of hiding up there at the front of the class? Am I engaging students in conversation before class to find out what they're working on? Am I asking students at the end of class, come back, or am I saying at the end of class, the next time I'll be here is tomorrow at 6 p.m. Would love to see you. Like those are all things that you can control that may or may not have an impact on your class numbers, but you can bet that the opportunity is there for them to positively impact your class numbers. and you and only you can control if you do them. That's a completely different frame of reference than overthinking all of what we've been talking about here in regards to your class numbers. What I described is the approach of a confident, empowered yoga teacher. So that's this first topic, this are you an overthinker? Now, what is the cure for an overthinker? Well, the cure for an overthinker is simple. It sounds simple. It may not feel simple to do, but the cure for an overthinker is to start experimenting with making decisions. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, hey, I need to think about it. I need to think about certain things. Like that teacher that said to me, well, I can't, I'm thinking about enrolling in your program. I've been looking at it. I have my eye on it, but I'm thinking about this other thing that I just enrolled in, and I'm not sure that going on and on about whether or not. So gift yourself the experiment of just making a decision. So that teacher could simply say to me, I've made the decision. This is not a good time for me. I'll get back in touch with you in 2 months. Or you get back in touch with me in 2 months. And that, for now, closes the door. But you're making a decision to say no, which is relieving your brain of having to do the mental gymnastics involved in thinking about it over and over again. And there's, I'm sure if you do associate with being an overthinker, lots of things that you overthink in regards to your teaching. So over the next 2 weeks, experiment with simply making a decision. And knowing that when you make a decision, it's not forever, it's for now. And that's not an irresponsible statement. That's actually a statement that will free you up to be able to do whatever it is you want to do with a lot more clarity and focus because you're not thinking in the back of your mind about whatever you were consumed with before. Now, one last thing on this. The tweaking the sequence at the last minute and that whole particular set of symptoms that is super common in teachers who are overthinkers. The way that you can make a decision and use sort of this framework I'm talking about here in that scenario is to experiment with teaching the same sequence for the next 6 weeks. So if you have a class that's once a week, for the next 6 classes, teach the same sequence. And when you wake up in the morning and you have that thought to quote unquote, just tweak it, do something else, change your mind, use some sort of internal mantra. No, the sequence I have is great. The sequence I have is, you could even say good enough. The sequence I have is the one I'm using for now. And talk to that inner voice that's asking you to just tweak it. Because that inner voice is the ego-driven voice that is about the lack of confidence, that is connected to the inner lack of confidence. And the amazing thing that I can promise you is going to happen is the more you start to make decisions, the more confident you're going to feel. So that's my experiment to you. If you're willing to try it, send me a DM on Instagram and let me know that you're in experiment phase in regards to this whole idea of moving from being an overthinker to being a decision maker. That's a transformation. That's a really powerful transformation. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is a particular phrase that's used in yoga classes. And I want to talk to you about this phrase because I want to be sure that if you're using this phrase, I want to talk to you a little bit about a particular aspect of saying this when you teach your classes. And that is when you use the word protect. So let me give you an example. And this is not my example. This is one that I hear in classes and one that I actually just today got a comment on my TikTok where she used this verbiage. Imagine you're teaching bridge pose and you say to the class, okay, let's come up into bridge. I want you to squeeze around your sitting bones to protect your low back. I'll give you another example. Let's say you're teaching tree pose and you say, lean into your left leg, lift your right foot and place it above or below your knee to protect, not on your knee, above or below your knee to protect your knee. So that's another example. Um, another place you might hear it is um, when you're teaching Warrior One. So let's say you have your students in downward facing dog and you're going to have them come into Warrior One and you say, step your right foot forward, drop your back heel, reach your arms up, keep your front knee over your heel to protect your knee. So in those three examples, I use the word protect. And what I am offering to you, or what I am suggesting here, is the idea that when you say something that includes the word protect, know that your students are hearing that, most likely thinking, oh, something bad's going to happen if I don't do what this person's telling me. But I don't know what that bad thing is. So I'm just going to accept that this person's saying to me, I have to do it this particular way. Otherwise, something bad's going to happen. And what I'm asking you is if you ever use the word protect in your cueing, I'm asking you, do you know what you're asking them to protect themselves from? For instance, in the example that I shared, squeeze around your sitting bones in bridge here. Squeeze around your sitting bones to protect your low back. Protect it from what? Place your foot above or below your knee, but not on your knee, above or below the knee to protect the knee. Protect it from what? And then in the example of Warrior One, don't let the knee go past the heel. Keep the knee over the heel to protect the knee. Protect it from what? Now, here's the thing. If you're going to use the word protect, what I suggest is that you absolutely should know the answer to that question. Because number one, somebody could ask you at the end of class, hey, I got that warning that you were sharing with us about XYZ pose. What am I protecting myself from? What bad thing is going to happen? And you want to be prepared to answer that question. Otherwise, it just looks like you're just saying stuff and you don't actually know what you're talking about. So, you know, think about if you do use that word protect, what are you thinking is going to happen? Now, of course, we're here in the pod space, in the pod cyberspace, so you and I can't have a conversation in real time about it. So I can't know what rationale you might have for any of the cues where you use the word protect. And you might actually have some rationale. So the idea, though, is if we really get into it from the perspective of anatomy and the fundamentals of anatomy, let's take the tree example. Do I really think that somebody could damage their knee enough that it warrants me saying protect? Because protect is a word that's going to land in a particular way. And it's going to suggest that danger, that harm, that injury can happen. And my first question is that really language that we want to be using in our classes? Do we want people to think that things that they do in yoga is potentially harmful to them? I would say no. And the next thing that I would suggest is that even in the case, let's take the case of a person does have their foot on on the medial aspect of their knee during tree. What is happening? They're doing it for maybe 3 seconds. What kind of one time in class, one time for 3 seconds, what kind of damage do we really think they're going to do? If I was really concerned about damage or potential injury, I would be much more harping on my students in high to low push-up and talking to them about activating the serratus anterior and recruiting the transversus abdominis and the quads in knee extension to distribute the weight and the effort of the pose from the shoulders to the entire body. That would be a reasonable place to be having a deeper conversation with my students, not so much about protect and risk and injury, but just watching them as they move through those movements, high to low push up dog, down dog, but not in these one off poses. So I guess the bottom line is number one, I don't believe that any of, and I don't want to say any of them, I don't believe that most of the things, or really I don't really believe that most of the things where the word protect is used is warranted. I don't think it's equal measure. The word protect is much more serious a word compared to what could possibly happen when these students are in these poses. Number two, I do believe that it suggests to students a certain level of fear and worry and concern about the potential injurious effects of yoga on their body, which I think the last thing we want to do is give people the impression that yoga is potentially something that can hurt them. And then the third point and the last point is it's my belief that a lot of yoga teachers say things like that and they don't know what they're talking about. And if you ask them, well, protect from what? They would say, I don't know. That's how I was trained. Or that's what I was trained to say. Or the person who trained me said, you have to keep your knee over your heel. Otherwise, the knee's going to get injured. Well, injured how? I don't know. I didn't ask and I don't know. So this is another rabbit hole where you can find yourself just parroting things in your classes, just parroting cues, parroting words, not knowing the why behind the cue, not knowing the why behind the phrase to protect. And then you wonder why you don't feel confident when you're teaching your classes. It's all connected. And one last thing that I'd like to share with you that I just mentioned, the concept of, well, that's what I was trained to say. If you have ever said that, what I would challenge you to do from today forward for the rest of your life is to really use that phrase judiciously, if ever. Because look, you were trained by somebody, I was trained by somebody. Everybody who is teaching yoga was trained by somebody. And no disrespect to the people that trained us. My first teacher, Baron Baptiste, I have incredible respect and fondness for. And nothing, not taking away anything from anyone's original or subsequent teachers that they've been trained by. But to go around and to say, I do things because that's the way I was trained, only puts you down because it suggests that you're not doing what you're doing because you think it's right. You're doing what you're doing because you're following what somebody told you to do. And I get it. The way yoga teachers are trained is a guru-based model where you go to a training, somebody has more experience than you, somebody has a particular way of doing things, and for whatever reason you connected with that person and you defer authority to that person and that person teaches you their way of doing it and then you go off and you teach it that way. Now, even though that's the model, that doesn't mean that you're not an active participant in that model. In fact, you can decide, I like this piece of what this person's doing, but I really prefer to do that part of it differently in a way that more resonates with how I want to show up in my classes. I mean, that's been my entire career. My initial couple of years of teaching, more than a couple of years, was absolutely ensconced in the Baptiste method. But over the years, I strayed away from that as I got more involved in learning anatomy. I started to question some of the methodologies that I had been originally trained to, and I essentially created my own way of teaching. And that allows me to go into the room and do things with an intention, do things with conviction, speak confidently, feel confident, feel like I have expert status, feel like I have a right to be there. So I don't ever say that phrase, well, I'm doing XYZ because that's how I was trained to do it. And I would simply suggest to you, this is another experiment you can try. Listen to your words and listen for times when you say, well, that's what I was trained to do, and ask yourself, well, what do I want to do? Because at the end of the day, no one is in charge of yoga. There is history, there is lineage, there are founders, there are methods that people have, there's approaches that people have, but no one's in charge. You are in charge of what you do when you go into your classes, you and you alone, because you're the only one there teaching. And how you choose to show up and teach can come from you and be informed and influenced by other things. But ultimately, you're the one, if you want to be a confident, empowered teacher, you're the one that needs to stand behind what you're doing rather than just saying, I'm just simply doing this because somebody trained me to do it, as if you had no choice in the matter. So that's kind of the last piece of that conversation around what we were just talking about earlier, that whole idea of using the word protect. So that kind of like brings it up to a higher level. Now, with that, I want to just mention a couple of things. I am, as we head into September of 2025, and I realize you may be listening to this anytime, who knows? My content is out there forever, so you may be listening to this 3 years from now, who knows? But if you are listening to this in and around September of 2025, I'm recording this obviously in August. I am heading into September with a list of new things I'm going to be offering. And I want to just throw out to you what some of the ideas are. Number one, I'm considering offering regular online yoga classes in a more regular and consistent way. Number two, I am considering conducting a study for women in menopause on the effects of weekly yoga classes on menopause, and specifically the musculoskeletal joint pain that can oftentimes come up in menopause. Number three, I'm thinking of starting a book club. And number four, I'm thinking of doing a live teacher training in Boston, which is where I live. So if any of those ideas are interesting to you and you are listening to this in August of 2025, so before we get to September, send me a direct message on Instagram and let me know which of those ideas is interesting to you. Now, of course, if you're listening to this sometime in the future, you can also just let me know you're listening to the episode and let me know an idea that's interesting to you. But because this is programming that's time sensitive, and I'm going to be doing some of these things in the last quarter of 2025, that's really when I need your feedback. With that, we're going to wrap this episode up. I hope that you have found this helpful. I hope you found something interesting here that you can use going forward. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you again on the next episode of Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Namaste. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to have a breakthrough to being the kind of yoga teacher who walks around the room, sharing cues you know the reason for, understands anatomy, teaching signature sequences without notes or any need to practice with class, and loves teaching yoga without stress, anxiety, or nervousness. If you are ready to be that yoga teacher, here is your next step. DM me the words podcast offer, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside of my signature program just because you are listening to the podcast. DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.